to introduce myself. My name is Stacy Davis Gates. I am a high school history teacher. I am a mother of 3 children, and I am a Chicagoan that votes. Nice. I also get to serve the Chicago Teachers Union as vice president. Before we get started today, I want to acknowledge the tragedy on the south side of our city today at Mercy Hospital. And at the same time, I also want to acknowledge all of the other senseless, violent murders that our city has absorbed these 8 years of Rahm Emanuel's administration and Gary McCarthy's tenure as our police superintendent. If we could take a moment, please. Thank you. So because I'm a teacher, I want to give you a couple of bell ringers. Where are my teachers? So the first bell ringer I want to provide today is what is not allowed at a forum of progressive organizations and labor unions, besides Rahm Emanuel and Gary McCarthy. So the first thing we want to do is that, but in all seriousness, we want to listen and we want to be curious today. The forum is very clear in what we're talking about. We are talking about the undoing of the Chicago that we've known for a very long time. Let's be very clear. There are lots of signs around this city, and many of those signs say building a new Chicago. Yet there are people here in Chicago who've been here for generations. So how do you build something new with those who are already here? So what we want to do tonight is to clarify that we're here and that we're not going anywhere. That the plight of those who live in our city is important. So when we say reversing what happened, that means something, and I'm a teacher, so I'm going to give you a hint. Reversing means that we're not going to continue to talk about how to close schools in this city. We're not going to continue to keep a surplus of Chicago Housing Authority money away from the people who need housing in this city. We're not going to continue to build edifices to the police department. In fact, we're going to use the money to resource people and communities. We're not going to talk about how we continue to put millions and billions of dollars downtown and neglect our south sides and our west sides of this city. It says reverse, but it should say investment. I would be remiss if I didn't say that we are in the Jackie Vaughn Hall, in the house that Karen Lewis built. And I would also be remiss if I didn't say that you have 4 women up here. Excuse me, sir, I'm a teacher. I think I told you. Security. Security, I think I've said that I'm a teacher. You don't do this in my classroom, sir. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. So as security is working with one of our unruly students, we have 4 women on the stage. July 2014. So in July of 2014, the Chicago Sun-Times released a poll, and it said that Karen Lewis could be mayor of this city. These 4 women stand up here, sit up here, will speak up here because she could have been mayor of this great city. That's a wonderful thing. And so going back to the house rules, I want to hear these people. Everyone who came here tonight, they want to hear the people. So let's keep our applause, our boos, our hisses, our loud outbursts, because we don't have enough wraparound services in our classrooms, to a minimum. You can't snap your fingers when you hear something that you like, because we can keep it moving with that. The next thing that I want to do is introduce our moderator. Mr. Evan Moore is a son of 2 CTU members. Mr. Evan Moore's parents are retired Chicago public school teachers, and he is currently an editor and a columnist for the Chicago Sun-Times. Mr. Moore writes very profoundly on the intersections of race, education, and sports. Beyond that, I wanted to go through some of the rules that we have here. Our candidates are going to get an opening statement. They're going to get to introduce themselves. They're going to tell you who they are and why they are on this stage tonight. Then Mr. Moore is going to provide a series of questions that are going to get to the point of how we reverse the decline. Then the candidates are going to ask questions of each other. That should be fun. And after that, we're going to take some questions from the audience. So please, already have your questions done, so we will be able to have some audience participation. Then thereafter, we're going to close out with closing statements from the candidates. So what I want to do is make sure that we introduce the great people on this stage. Ms. Lori Lightfoot. Cook County Board President, Tony Preckwinkle. Our State Comptroller, Susanna Mendoza. Dr. Amara Inya. And talk about irony. Mr. Paul Vallis. I told y'all no booing. I told y'all we don't. No, we're not doing that tonight. We're not doing that tonight. Look, listen, y'all. This is something that I used to teach our freshmen. You can agree to disagree. You can be disagreeable, but you don't have to express it. Let's get it together, people. Mr. Moore, can you come to the stage? Because folks is restless. Folks is restless. Look, come on, because we will remove you. Evan. Thank you all.
Chair, not really for big guys, huh? All right. All right, Stacy, thank you for having me here, and it's a pleasure to be here, and welcome everyone to the Great Displacement, a mayoral forum on reversing black pushout and building a Chicago for the many. This will start off with the rules, as you already know who these folks are. The rules, which has been previously shared with the candidates, are simple. Each candidate will receive 2 minutes for an opening statement and 90 seconds for a closing statement. In between candidates, we'll have 1 minute to answer questions, some of which will be from me, others selected from you in the audience, and one final question from a fellow candidate. Marcos, so here is, we'll be keeping time, and we'll hold a yellow folder when there are 30 seconds left, and a red folder when time is up. We're fortunate to have a big crowd here with us tonight. We expect to hear things you like, and let's be real, there's going to be some things you probably aren't going to like. So, however, we don't want to take away anything from the valuable time from the candidates, so we're looking for everyone to use their inside voices when speaking. So, seeing we're at the Chicago Teachers Union, I've been informed that those who are too disruptive, we put out a class. So it's a little joke there. Laugh with me. All right. So, but seriously, let's all be respectful for each other. And obviously, a lot of you have come here today, and you have a lot of things to say. So let's try to keep things moving. Without further ado, candidates drew out of a hat for the opening statement. So we'll begin with Tony Preckwinkle.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I'm very grateful to be here. The first thing I should say is, along with Stacy, I'm a high school history teacher. I loved being a teacher. It not only prepared me for public life, it encouraged me to go in public life. I spent 10 years in the classroom. I spent 19 years being alderman of the 4th Ward. It gave me an opportunity to work on community building, community revitalization. We built about 1,500 units of affordable housing, either renovating them or building them new. We built mixed income housing. We built market rate housing, actually the first market rate housing in the northern part of my ward in 70 years. And we also spent a lot of time trying to support business development. So redensifying communities and supporting business development were the hallmark of my almost 20-year tenure as alderman. My grandkids go to Chicago public schools, and I know how important good public schools are to communities. And I want all of our children to have good public schools in their neighborhoods. The problem we have is that good public schools are not equally distributed around the city. In many of our communities, our schools are underfunded or they've been closed. And that's a real challenge for communities, because it's hard to have a strong community if you don't have good public schools. That's particularly true in communities that struggle with violence. We have 77 community areas in Chicago. 15 of them have 70% of the violence. And we've got to figure out holistic strategies for dealing with that violence. It can't just be policing, because those are communities that, as I said, have closed or underfunded public schools. They have high levels of unemployment, high levels of low levels of educational attainment. They're food deserts. They have a holistic challenges, and we've got to deal with them holistically. So we've got to have good public schools in every neighborhood, and we've got to meet the challenges of all of our communities. I've spent time as a teacher, time as an alderman, and 8 years as county board president, as a county executive.
Hey, Tony, time.
I think I'm uniquely qualified for this job. Thank you.
All right, Comptroller Mendoza.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you. I'm Susanna Mendoza, and I'm running for mayor because the future of Chicago is at stake. I'm concerned about the next generation, not just the next 4 years. And right now is no time for a caretaker mayor or someone who supports or represents the status quo. Now, I love this city, and we've got some major challenges, but nothing that we can't tackle together. And the challenges that our city faces, the challenges that drive the great displacement, are challenges we're all familiar with. Violence, under-resourced schools, high property taxes. And these just aren't challenges to me, they're personal. I know what it's like to be displaced. I was born in Little Village, and when I was 7 years old, there was a shooting and a killing on my block. And my parents, like so many other parents, were worried about their kids and their family. And they packed up their family and they moved out of Little Village. No family in this city should feel that their only way to protect their kids or themselves is to move out of their neighborhood. Now, it wasn't my choice to leave Little Village when I was a little kid, but it was my choice as an adult after college to come back to Little Village and to try to make a difference. Now, I remember what it was like very clearly to be a 7-year-old little girl afraid to walk to school. And as much as I love learning, it was really hard to focus because I was too busy worrying about the walk back home. No kid should have to worry about that. My husband and I are lucky that we have a 5-year-old, soon-to-be 6-year-old little boy who's a proud kindergartner in our local community Chicago Public School. And we're going to be proud parents of a CPS student for the next 13 years of our lives. This is why it is about time that Chicagoans have a mayor that's from the neighborhoods, that understands the challenges that drive people out of those neighborhoods.
Time's up.
And most importantly, who's going to focus on putting neighborhoods first. Thank you, and would love to have your support. Looking forward to the forum.
Lori?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Lori Lightfoot, and it's my great pleasure to be here. In light of the tragedy at the Mercy Hospital, I have to change course and talk to you a moment about what I think is one of the most pressing issues in this race and in our time, and that's the violence in our city. In the last 7 years since Rahm Emanuel was sworn in, 23,000 people have been shot. We had a mayor who learned on the job about public safety, and look at where that's gotten us. We can't afford to make that mistake again. With due respect to the other people that are on this stage, I'm the only person who's got a depth of experience in dealing with public safety, has a comprehensive plan to make sure that public safety is not just a commodity for the wealthy, but it's something that every child can walk to their school in their neighborhood without the fear of violence and violence becoming their norm. The key issue that I think in this race is who can you trust? Who can you trust that's going to not just talk the talk now, but actually deliver? I am a person that you can trust because I grew up in a working class family. We struggled every day financially to be able to pay our rent, to make our utilities, and be able to have a decent life. My father worked 2 and 3 jobs, and my mother worked a series of low-income jobs. That's not something, that experience is not something you simply forget. And that is something that I carry with me every single day and that I will take with me to the mayor's office. There are tough choices that we're going to have to make, but my commitment to you, and if you remember nothing else about me tonight, remember that as your mayor, I will put people first. I will make sure that equity and inclusion become the North Stars and our governing principles for moving our city together. We have all the tools at our disposal that we need to be able to unite and bring forward solutions that are actually going to uplift the quality of life of people in the neighborhoods. I look forward to the discussion, and I look forward to winning your support. Thank you very much.
Mr. Vallis.
Thank you so much. First of all, I want to thank you all for not running for mayor. I see.
Come on, bro.
Well, thank you.
Come on, speak.
Well, first of all, I'm Paul Vallis. I was born and raised in Roseland, in a grandson of Greek-American immigrants, and I come from a family of public servants. There are 6 veterans in my family. There are 4 police officers in my family. There are 3 teachers in my family, and 1 a firefighter paramedic. And our entire life, my entire life has been devoted to public service, as revenue director, as budget director, and as school superintendent. And when I ran against the establishment, against Rod Blagojevich, I didn't go to consultant heaven afterwards. I went on to other tasks, to rebuild the Philadelphia school districts, to rebuild New Orleans after Katrina, to go to Haiti after the earthquakes, and Chile, and then to work for the Justice Department for Sally Yates on adult education and prison reform. My entire life has been dedicated to public service. We are in a financial crisis, and the financial crisis is because of incompetency in the mayor's office. In fact, as we now speak, the mayor plans on rushing through another $1.7 billion TIF program, not to mention probably float a $10 billion pension obligation bond so that he can award about $400 million of bond business to financial consultants and tax attorneys, et cetera. So at the end of the day, we're still being taken to the cleaners. We have public safety problems that are escalating. We have 80% of the city that has not experienced any investment. We have communities where 50, 60% of the men are in some phase of the criminal justice system, and there is no solution. The challenges that we face require someone with extensive management experience, but someone who not only knows how to balance budgets, but someone who knows how to prioritize those budgets so that all of our communities can be served. All of our communities can benefit. I believe I'm that candidate, and that's why I'm running. So I look forward to a spirited debate, and it's great to be here. Thank you very much.
Dr. Enya.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I want to thank the organizers of this forum, the many groups that came together to make this happen. My name is Amara Enya. By profession, I work in public policy. In my heart, I'm an organizer. I'm a proud resident of the West Side of Chicago and the product of public schools from pre-K through college. So I am the evidence of what investment in public education can look like. I'm here not to talk to you about what I will do for you, but about what we can do together. What's required in this city is a paradigm shift in how the city is operated. I'm actually here because I fundamentally believe that people in the neighborhoods know what they want and know what they need, and that it is the responsibility of government and those who purport to serve our interests to represent our values and our priorities in policymaking. And for far too long in the city of Chicago, we have not seen that. I'm here to amplify the voices of the individuals and groups that I've worked alongside for the last several years on many issues, whether it was pushing for community benefits agreements on the South Side with the Obama Presidential Center, or fighting against police infrastructure investment through No Cop Academy, and the young folks at Good Kids Math City and others who've been organizing for years on this issue. Or back in 2011, working with parents to fight against school closures, many of which hit communities on the West Side like the Austin community. That's why I'm here. I'm here to amplify your voices and your concerns and to usher in a paradigm shift in Chicago. Thank you.
All right, let's get to the questions. All right, Lori, you're starting off. Over the last 8 years, Chicago's cost of living has been driven higher by the city's progressive revenue schemes. On one hand, low-income folks have faced increases in taxes and fees on water and sewer bills, cell phone services, and the issuance of red light and speed camera tickets on the south and west sides. Thousands of people have been pushed into bankruptcy because of city sticker tickets. Chicago needs revenue to pay our bills and to make substantial investments in the south and west side of the city. And we all know Springfield needs to be involved. But what will you do at the city level to generate revenue from those who are most able to pay?
Well, you're right. We live in one of the most taxed cities and the most taxed county, unfortunately, in the country. And low-income families and individuals and working families have shouldered far too great a burden because our tax system, our levies and fees, are been completely regressive. So the first thing that we have to do is make sure that we are giving a break to those families and those individuals who are least able to shoulder that burden. Specifically, we've got to get our fiscal house in order. We have a city budget that is out of control. We're wasting millions and tens of millions of dollars every year. We've got to look at a series of progressive revenue sources to make sure that we are really putting forward a plan that makes those who are most able, and I count myself among them, pay their fair share. The secretaries shouldn't be paying the same thing as the CEOs. We shouldn't be driving people into bankruptcy over red light tickets or parking tickets as we're doing now. So we've got to significantly change that.
All right. Tony, same question?
Sure. You know, we face some real challenges, not just in the city, but in the state. So the first thing I should say is I support a progressive income tax. And I'm grateful for the election of J.B. Pritzker, who's committed to that. But we have to understand that that's going to take time to implement. We've got to change the Constitution. So it's several years off. We have to hope for more state support for our public schools and for our local units of government as a result of the progressive income tax, but we have to look at our own resources first. I'm strongly in favor of TIF reform. We have to look at the TIF district. This is supposed to be a vehicle for catalyzing development, and yet some of the most valuable property in the city in our downtown is all in TIF districts. So we have to look carefully at TIF reform, TIF surpluses, and winding down TIFs that are no longer needed. I also think that we have to invest in affordable housing if we're going to try to keep working families in the city. And as I said, as alderman, we built 1,500 units of affordable housing, either rehab or new. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk to you today about finances. Thank you.
Comptroller Mendoza.
Thank you for the question. Number one, I want to address the issue of the city stickers. Because some of you may recall as city clerk that I took on the draconian system that existed where people would have to take a day off of work to literally go stand in a 3 to 4 hour line to purchase a city sticker, which is an expensive wheel tax in the city of Chicago. At the time, my first year in office, I fought Mayor Emanuel on raising the price of the stickers across the board by $60, and I won that fight. But part of what happened was an unintended consequence of people getting expensive tickets that they couldn't afford to pay, and now you hear of folks actually seeking to apply for bankruptcy in order to get some relief. That's not right. And when there are unintended consequences, we have to address them. As mayor, I would make it one of my first priorities to make sure that we provide an amnesty for people who have been impacted by these draconian fees at the end of the day. And more importantly, set up payment plans as well for people to be able to more easily afford to purchase their stickers and be in compliance with the law. But I also am in favor of a progressive income tax, I should say, and other revenue streams that will make it easier for people to provide the revenues that we need to invest in human capital without asking people to continue to feel nickeled and dimed by the city. Thank you.
Danielle?
So for the city, generating revenue requires us to implement innovative ideas that scale the economy as a whole. So I talk about bigger ideas like creating a public bank for the city, diversifying our economic ecosystem through cooperative economic models. And we are talking about displacement. You cannot generate revenue if your population is declining. This is why we're here. So making sure that we're actually attracting our population back to the city. Specifically on the issue of economic justice, every fine and fee should be progressive, meaning that it should be based upon your ability to pay. I also strongly believe that it's the little things that drive people out of the city. So people should be able to more easily get on payment plans. I believe on waivers and amnesties, especially around holiday times, because we're finding that people get the boot on their car when they're trying to make ends meet at the end of the year. Those are the little things that drive our population out. Those are some of the things that I would do as mayor.
Thank you, Dr. Nanya. Mr. Vallis?
Okay, great. On my website, I laid out a presentation on how I would lay out a 5-year financial plan for the city. It lays it out in detail, but let me give you the highlights. First, we need a legislative agenda. You can make the income tax progressive without a constitutional change to the credits. We just need to make sure that if the income tax is going to be raised, local government distributed fund is protected, and we get a restoration of a corporate personal property replacement tax. That would generate close to $200 million a year for the city. And we need to make sure that we achieve full state funding equity when it comes to teachers' retirement system. Secondly, we need to get at the spending side. I've laid out 12 different areas of spending, expenditure controls, and I've also talked about retiring the TIFs so that you could generate enough additional money so that all that would be left for the city to do would be to cap local property taxes no higher than the rate of inflation or 5%, whichever is less, and you could get rid of your red light cameras, and at the same time, you could also cap fees and fines. So at the end of the day, there is a way out, and I think the Pritzker administration will give us the opportunity to accomplish that.
All right, let's move on to question number 2. While the unemployment rate nationally has been on the decline, Illinois had the highest black population unemployment rate in the country. In Chicago, specifically, the black unemployment rate is over 10%, more than double that than for white workers. We know that in many neighborhoods on the south and west sides, real unemployment rate is much higher than what's reported. Despite this, public subsidies for economic development and job creation, like the TIF program, continue to flow downtown. 2 different studies have shown since 2002, majority black communities have lost more downtown jobs than they have gained. How would you use the mayor's office to create jobs where they're most needed? And leading that one off will be Tony.
First of all, I think it's really important to begin by talking about having decent wages for working people. I was a very strong supporter of the Fight for 15 from the very beginning. People who work for a living ought to be able to support themselves and their family. So the Fight for 15 is really critical. As president of the county board, one of the things I've worked on is the Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership, which is the city-county collaborative to provide employment training for people who need it and to provide resources for employers who need workers. And we focused on manufacturing, information technology, healthcare, hospitality, industries where there were career ladders and people could enter at a fairly low level and move up. And we created programs that provided opportunities for young people, particularly young people in the 16 to 24-year-old age group who are out of school and out of work, to get into these industries as interns in a summer program with wraparound services, and then move into full-time employment in some of those same sectors.
All right, Controller Mendoza, same question.
Sure, thank you. Look, I think it's really important to create jobs in this city and to invest in neighborhoods in a way where people who live in those neighborhoods have access not just to a job, but to the training that they need, the life skills that they need to be able to hold on to jobs. Obviously, I'm in huge support of $15 minimum wage, but that's not enough. We need to train tomorrow's workforce in Chicago today. And it starts by reinvesting our resources in neighborhoods, because that's where people live and they shouldn't have to travel far. And in reality, many people don't even have access to the transportation that they need to get the training that they need or to get to their place of employment. So I'm committed to working with everyone to see what we can do as a city to shape Chicago's future together, specifically where it matters, which is in the neighborhoods.
All right, Dr. Enya.
What the mayor's office can do is put pressure on the philanthropic community to meet their obligations to fund organizations that serve particularly Black and brown young people in their neighborhoods. We've seen that the statistics in terms of that investment has not been what it should be. That is the first line, so that they're coming with the wraparound services and supports that they need. Second is a program that I had the pleasure of partnering with called Blue 1647, based in the neighborhoods, where we actually train individuals in the jobs of the future: advanced manufacturing, tech, information technology, coding. So because they're not getting the exposure in schools, which leads to the other point. We need to expand those citywide, because that's giving them training for the jobs for the future, but also in our public schools, we have to invest in those sorts of career and tech ed and vocational education programs so that our kids graduate with the skills necessary to go to college, work, or do both.
All right, thank you. Mr. Vallis, same question.
Okay, very quickly, and I encourage people to go to the website because I've answered this question too. 3 things. One is we need to take advantage of federal and state tax credits. The Opportunity Zone tax breaks have the capacity to generate billions of dollars of investment. And if we dedicate half of the proceeds in future TIF revenues from existing TIFs, we could invest we would have $2 billion in equity, and we could raise $10 billion for the investment on the south and west sides. And then if we turned around and we used the Amazon-type tax breaks that exist at the state and local level, we could wrap those incentives. We could wrap those incentives around those tax breaks. And then secondly, the city controls $20 billion in money. That's all the budget, schools, et cetera. If you just did MBEWB, if you adopt a Hire Chicago and a contract with Chicago, by Chicago, hire Chicago, like we did when I steered 58% of all contracts to minority and women-owned businesses under the school construction program during the Chicago public school years, you could create tens of thousands of jobs. So 2 basic things could be transformational.
Time's up. Thank you. All right, let's move on to question. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
Don't forget about me,
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm bad. Sorry about
That's
that.
all right. What we need is a comprehensive plan to uplift the quality of life in our neighborhoods. What that looks like is making sure that we've got real job training and development. We've got some examples through the Heartland Alliance and others that really provide good opportunities for a real runway to good jobs. We've got to uplift the quality of our neighborhood schools. Neighborhood schools are more than just places of learning. They're neighborhood assets and anchors. And if we've got a ready, willing, and able workforce, because we've created vocational opportunities and other opportunities in the schools to make sure that our kids are ready to take on the 21st century jobs, that's going to do a huge amount. We've also got to invest in making sure that people have access to good medical care, mental health services, because we know that a lot of our kids in neighborhoods have been traumatized in ways that are akin to our veterans who've done multiple tours in Afghanistan. Well, we've got to have a mayor who focuses the priority not just on the downtown, but actually takes monies and invests in the neighborhoods and then encourages businesses to do the same. And we've got to create small business opportunities as well.
All right, thank you. All right, to number 3 this time, for real this time. All right. Unlike the other global cities in the United States like New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, Chicago can continue to experience devastating levels of crime. High violence rates mirrors high High violence rates mirrors high employment rates, school closures, and lack of general economic activity, what's basically commonly known as hurt people hurt people. Some people. And the experience of perception of unsafety is the main driver of black exodus from Chicago. That said, administration after administration and superintendent after superintendent have failed to bring Chicago's violence in line with other major cities, American cities over the last decade. By the end of your first term as mayor, how much will you have reduced crime and how will you have done it? And this one starts off is for Comptroller Mendoza.
Great, thank you. Look, the issue of violence is so personal to me. I mean, I shared my story with you of having to leave my neighborhood at the age of 7, so I get this. The issue of violence isn't just about police. I mean, we need police to be better trained, to be able to walk into any situation knowing how they're supposed to deal with the situation and de-escalate. We also need more detectives to solve more crimes. That's all common sense. The numbers prove that. But we need to get to the fundamental root of the problem of why this violence exists. And I believe it's a lack of investment in human capital. When we disinvest in people, there's fatal consequences to that. I commit as mayor to investing my time, my heart and soul, and all of the resources and people around me in figuring out what we need to do to bring down violence. And I believe that the beginning of that is truly reprioritizing how we spend taxpayer dollars. And I want to spend them investing in people. That's, I think, the big solution.
Dr. Angus, any question?
I live in the Garfield Park community. So experiencing violence, witnessing violence is not theoretical, it's very real. The way that we combat that is actually getting to the root causes of violence, which is our public policy failings across the board. It means we have to reinvest in mental health services, not just in communities, but in schools. It means we need a Department of the Environment because there are public health hazards that our children are being exposed to right now that actually affect brain development and behavior. We have to invest in mitigating public health hazards. It means expanding access to the economy so that people can work. These are all public policy areas that we have not focused on for generations in Chicago. And if we actually do the work of focusing on those public policy areas, violence will actually decrease.
Hi, Mr. Vallis.
Look, we have development going on in 10 of our 50 wards, 40 wards, no development, some areas in depression-like conditions. At the end of the day, you need a comprehensive, massive approach, almost a Marshall Plan, to invest in these communities to provide hope. And that's why I've articulated how to use opportunity zones, how to use the state and local Amazon-type tax incentives that we're going to give to one company, $2.5 billion, or how to redivert TIF money, or for that matter, how to apportion a part of the $20 billion that the city spends when it comes to contracting and hiring, so we're promoting economic development in the community. But at the end of the day, we also have to recognize that we have a mayor who gutted the police department. That's why you have homicide clearance rates of 17% and shooting clearance rates of 5% because they allowed the detectives division to whittle down to less than 700 police. So we've got to create the conditions for public safety to take root, but we also have to make sure that the police have the resources and the infrastructure to ensure effectiveness and accountability.
Mr. Vallis, time's up. Thank you. Lori?
As I said at the outset, public violence is really the issue of our time. And if we do not get a handle on this issue, we will have failed as a city because we're failing our children who are growing up with fear as their norm. I am the only candidate on this stage and in this race who really has a perspective on this issue from every direction. I've been a prosecutor, I've held police officers accountable, I've investigated police misconduct in my more recent roles as president of the Chicago Police Board and as a leader of the Police Accountability Task Force. I know these issues inside and out. We can't afford to have on-the-job training on this most vital issue. What we're seeing is a public health crisis, and we've got to treat it as that. Get at the root causes of the violence. I've released a comprehensive plan that deals with these issues. We have to have a mayor's office of public safety. We have 2 full-time people dealing with this issue when New York has 50 and LA has 30. We're failing because we're not investing the kind of resources that we need to deal with these issues. We've got to deal with the shameful homicide clearance rate, and we've got to make sure that we are being proactive on gun violence.
Thank you. Tony?
I would argue that the cause of the violence in so many of our communities is racism and segregation. Profound racism and segregation. This is one of the most segregated cities in the country. I don't know if you've had a chance to see it, but the Metropolitan Planning Council did a report called The Cost of Segregation, and it's basically billions of dollars to our region. Those regions that have the least inequality are the most economically vibrant, and we have tremendous inequality in our region and our city. And so we've got communities in which there's been incredible disinvestment, neglect, marginalization, and those are the communities that have the most violence. In the county, for the first time under my leadership, we started investing in anti-violence, anti-recidivism, and restorative justice programs, instead of just running the jails and the courts. We've put $18 million into that effort over the last several years. We need an Office of Violence Prevention in the city of Chicago, and we need to invest millions of dollars in it, not hundreds of thousands, as they do in Los Angeles and New York, which have together less murders every year than we do in Chicago.
All right, question number 4. Over the last 8 years, the students and families in Chicago public schools have been forced to deal with regular chaos. Major budget cuts, a devastating lack of wraparound services, a state takeover of special education, CEOs fired and in prison, and the largest mass urban school closure in U.S. history. Major increases in state and local funding has resulted in an improved financial picture at CPS, but schools continue to lack librarians, counselors, and nurses. In your first CPS budget, what priorities will you have, and how will you ensure that students will have what they need to succeed? Dr. Anya, all you.
What has been lacking in every decision that CPS has made has been an equity lens in policymaking. That includes how capital dollars are expended, where new buildings are built, annexes are built. That also includes where programmatic expenditures are made, who gets access to IB programs and who does not. I've worked on those issues for many years, most recently getting an IB school on the West Side. Also working as part of a team to address the special education cuts that denied students their federally entitled rights in CPS. I've worked on those issues firsthand. I also worked with National Teachers Academy supporting a level 1+ black school that CPS said that they were going to close in spite of their performance. Without an equity lens, we cannot ensure that every child has access to a high-quality education. I believe that CPS has to review selective enrollment schools, which is built-in stratification so that only those lucky enough to get in get access to a good education. We have to look at how school boundary lines are being drawn because that can perpetuate segregation as well.
Thank you. Mr. Vallis?
You know, what's really important here is for the city to lay out a 5-year plan. When I took over the Chicago Public Schools, they had a structural deficit of $1 billion. When I left, they had $1 billion in cash, and they had 70,000 more students than they have today. So at the end of the day, the city does have an opportunity to stabilize school finances and to reprioritize the budget so that you're investing in things that are going to generate growth. Schools have only grown for 6 years in the last 4 decades. Those just happened to be the 6 years when I was superintendent. So if now that we have a governor that's going to fully fund the new formula that you all worked so hard to get passed, if we fully fund the new formula and we prioritize the budget so that we're investing in growth areas, then we're not only going to have the money that we need, but we're going to grow the district so that we're going to get more. That's the strategy I've used in the past. That's the strategy I'll use in the future.
All right, thank you. Lori?
Well, fundamentally, what we need is a reset and a mindset of how we approach public education. I'm a public school kid. I walk to public school with my neighborhood friends, and we have to rebuild the quality of our neighborhood schools. Not only are they, and should they be, community assets, and I support the growth of community schools, we know that if we have great quality public schools, people are not going to be leaving the city in the droves that they are right now. So they also have a role to play in economic development. But fundamentally, we have to have a mayor who doesn't treat parents and teachers and staff as unwelcome guests at the party. We've got to bring people into the discussion on the front end so that if we have to make hard choices, and we're going to have to, that we are doing it in a way that doesn't do further harm to communities, to families, and to individuals. I don't want to see our CPS kids have to travel outside of their neighborhood to get a decent education, because intended or not, we're sending them the message that your neighborhood is not worth investing in. And we have to fundamentally change that calculus.
Tony, same question?
Sure. The first thing I want to say is that I'm in favor of an elected school board. And while that doesn't immediately address some of the challenges that our schools face, I think that's a profound way to address them over the long term. Secondly, you know, if you look at our public schools, just as if you look at health outcomes, life expectancies, you can predict resources on the basis of zip codes. Just as you can predict longer life expectancies in a 601 or 60601 downtown zip code, and you know that people have long life expectancies, and if you go to Garfield Park or if you go to Englewood, you know that people have lower life expectancies. The same thing is true for resources for our schools. Neighborhood, elementary, and secondary schools have to be our priority, and we have to freeze charters, we have to freeze school closings, and we have to find additional resources to support professionals in our public schools. That's the only way we're going to meet this challenge.
All right, thank you. Comptroller Mendoza.
Thank you. Look, I've been fighting Bruce Rauner for the last 2 years of my life, taking him on specifically on one of the issues being education funding reform. And even though I'm the state controller, and even though I'm from Chicago, I traveled every corner of the state along with the architect of school funding reform, Senator Andy Manar, trying to make the case to everyone outside of Chicago while Governor Rauner was busy vilifying Chicago school children, and the teachers who teach our children, saying they were illiterate and that they were teaching them in decrepit schools that were more like jails. I was traveling the state countering that garbage. And at the end of the day, thanks to, although we've been talking about funding education reform for 30 years, we got it done this year. And when Governor Rauner vetoed that bill, it was me as controller that kept our schools open by prioritizing payments in order to make sure that when we missed that first school payment, first time in history, our office was able to cobble together enough other dollars to make sure our kids got to school on time. I got the biggest skin in the game with my son in this system. You better as hell believe that I'm going to make sure that we're properly funding our schools moving forward.
All right, before we get to question number 5, I just want to remind everyone to kind of hold their applause. I know a lot of the candidates are saying things that you want to hear and stuff like that, so let's move on to number 5. There's a housing crisis in Chicago. More than 50% of Cook County residents are paying more than they can afford for housing. Gentrification and our public housing policy are pushing black people out of Chicago and Latinx people from neighborhood to neighborhood. A pillar of the mayor's affordable housing policy, the Affordable Requirements Ordinance, has been a failure. The Chicago Tribune front page expose reveals that in the last 10 years, only 441 affordable units were produced on site that received report from the city. The RO only generated 22 3-bedroom apartments between 2007 and 2017. The Institute of Housing Studies at DePaul estimates that Chicago needs more than 119,000 new affordable units of affordable housing. What's their plan to create this amount of affordable housing? And leading off for this one will be Mr. Vallis.
Well, great. You know, the subsidy program has been an abysmal failure, so let me suggest 3 things. The first thing is you need to remove the obstacles to the creation of more affordable housing, and that means something as simple as garden units. If they allowed landlords to take their unimproved units and convert them to garden units, they could create 150,000 units without a single subsidy in the next 2 to 3 years. Secondly, you've got to take these properties that are in delinquency or in housing court or are up for tax sales that never get sold for 4 years, only allowed to deteriorate. And you've got to turn them over to local developers so that they can remodel them using developmental fee grants and put them back into circulation. And the third thing that you've got to do is you've got to modify your delinquency and foreclosure laws so we're not driving retirees and families out of their houses. And the fourth thing is we've got to cap property taxes. If you cap individual property taxes, you won't have gentrification because taxes won't grow more than 1 to 2% a year. Those are things you can do and I'll do as mayor.
Lori?
I've released a comprehensive housing plan, and it's on our website, lightfootforchicago.com, but let me give you the highlights. First, we've got to have a city that actually wants to build affordable housing units to keep families in the city. Everyone that you talk to that's in this game, whether it's community-based organizations or developers, will tell you that the red tape and bureaucracy that they have to go through to get a plan approved is out of sight. So we've got to have a city that actually works to allow for the building of affordable housing plan. With due respect to the aldermen in the room, we got to get rid of aldermanic prerogative. It perpetuates segregation, and it prevents affordable housing units from being built all over the city and providing economic diversification in our neighborhoods. We also have to deal with the homeless problem. I have proposed a progressive increase in the real estate transfer tax that will give most homeowners a break, but it will make sure that we generate monies that can be dedicated to provide resources to the homeless. There's more that we can do. Look at our plan, but this is the issue, one of the biggest issues that we face in the city.
Thank you. All right.
One of the first things we have to do is preserve our existing stock of affordable housing, which is why I support Representative Will Guzzardi's efforts in Springfield to eliminate the prohibition on looking at rent control. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we have a $120,000 unit gap in affordable housing units. That is, there's a demand for 120,000 more affordable housing units than we actually have. And building affordable housing was a priority for me when I was alderman. As I said, in my ward alone, we built 1,500 units of affordable housing. And I did that by working with the development community, business community, and the philanthropic community to try to be sure that we built as many units as we possibly could. And we have to have balanced development. We have to make sure that our developers who are doing so well downtown and the near west side and in the South Loop are also helping us build our communities where we've had such tremendous population loss and de-densification. We created, under my tenure, the Cook County Land Bank, which has acquired foreclosed homes and converted them back into for-sale units.
Thank you, Tony.
And also bought vacant lots for development.
Controller Mendoza, same question.
Thank you. Look, I want to make all neighborhoods in Chicago affordable for everyone. But we have to get to the root of the problem. Number one, I'd like to thank everyone in this room that actually voted for a new assessor. I see him in the front row here, but the fact of the matter is that we have a broken, corrupt, and racist property tax system here in Cook County specifically, where homes on the west and south side of the city of Chicago are underwater and are going to have a hard time ever getting back into a place where they'll ever be able to get the value on their home that they put in. That's one of the reasons why people are leaving Chicago. That's one of the reasons for the great displacement, that people feel that they don't have anything of value in the roof over their head. And so we need to get to that problem and fix that. Now, affordable housing should exist in every single one of the 50 wards in Chicago. And I commit as mayor to work hard to make sure that if developers want to develop in downtown, they better have a plan for how they're going to help revitalize and reinvigorate our neighborhoods for everyone in the city of Chicago.
Dr. Anya?
Expanding affordable housing means not just for individuals, but for families. One of the biggest challenges when we were pushing for expanding affordable housing was that families, more than one or two people, were not finding sufficient housing where they could live. That has to be a top priority. The second is making sure that there are no incentives to crowd affordable housing only on certain parts of the city, which has happened year after year after year. It has to be an even spread where families can choose to live anywhere in the city that they like. The third is holding CHA accountable for how they're using the dollars that they receive from the federal government to make sure that people are not sitting on the rolls waiting for housing while we sit on a surplus. That absolutely has to happen. And finally, we have to hold our new assessor accountable to make sure that we have a property tax system that does not penalize those who are in lower income communities, which have been done for years and is the reason why a lot of people actually lost their homes. And overarching this issue was an economy where people can afford to stay in their homes.
Thank you. All right, number 6. Police violence in Chicago is a national headline, not only in recent years, but for decades. Community organizers have put forward proposals creating democratically elected community control of the police. As mayor, how will you work to end police violence in our city, increase community oversight of the police, and ensure that the police have a good relationship with all the city's residents? And first one leading off of that will be Lori Lightfoot.
This is something that I've been working on consistently for a number of years, and particularly over the last 2 years. I support civilian oversight of the police. I have held police officers accountable in my role, both as a federal prosecutor, where I prosecuted corrupt police officers, when I worked for the police department and I investigated police-involved shootings and other misconduct on the part of the police. I enforced the lie you die rule, meaning that if you lied in the course of an internal investigation, you would be fired. I did that so efficiently, frankly, that the FOP tried to stop me and change the rules after I left the police department. These are areas in which we can absolutely make progress. We've laid out a roadmap in the Police Accountability Task Force report that became the underpinnings of the Department of Justice the DOJ report, and is now going to be embodied in the consent decree. As mayor, I will continue the work that me and other people across the city have been working on for years to make sure that we hold police officers accountable, whether it's in police-involved shootings or in other misconduct.
Okay, thank you. Tony?
So my priority as mayor would be implementation of the consent decree, particularly around investment in professional development for our police department, more investment in crisis intervention training and de-escalation strategies, and also better supervision. The standard is 1 sergeant for 8 officers on the street, and in some of our police districts we have 3 times as many officers, 24 to 30 officers for each sergeant to try to supervise. Let me say it's really important not only to address the challenge of police accountability, but also to deal with the prosecution. And I'm very proud of the fact that I worked very hard for Kim Foxx, brought in a new state's attorney who is compassionate as well as committed to justice, and who has acknowledged the terrible abuses in the police department under John Burge and Ron Watts and Detective Guevara up on the Northwest side, and had mass exonerations of folks who were tortured into confessing. So I think it's important not only that we look at the police, but we look at other actors in the criminal justice system and try to be sure that they're committed to reform as well.
Comptroller Mendoza, same question.
Sure, I believe that we need to implement the consent decree. Key component of that is police training. We keep talking about the fact that it is a scary job to put on that uniform, but when police go to respond to a call, they need to know what they're walking into and be well prepared and well trained to deal with whatever situation, with the goal being de-escalation, not necessarily engagement. I further believe that we have to be a lot more transparent as to what's happening in the police department. I think as mayor, if I'm your mayor, I'll be looking at all videos where there's police fatal shootings, and more importantly, making sure that the public is also aware of what's happening in those videos, releasing them responsibly but timely, because we need to know that it's important for all of us to engage in helping to heal this huge division that has been in place now for decades and is only getting worse. It's time for our city to come together, but to deal with the ugly truths that we have to deal with, but also put some mechanisms in place to make sure that we never have the situations that we've seen, like Laquan McDonald, ever happen again in the future in this city.
Controller Mendoza, thank you. Dr. Anya.
As a city, we will pay $1.7 billion in police misconduct cases alone. That is taxpayer dollars, yours and my dollars, going to pay for a refusal to implement reforms that communities have been pushing for decades. I have to uplift the many groups that pushed for civilian accountability and oversight of the police, because without their work, we wouldn't have even gotten to where we are today. We need a mayor that actually values the voice of community who are living with the results of the lack of reform. We also need a mayor that will aggressively negotiate on our behalf with the Fraternal Order of Police contract, which is really the core of this conversation. And we need a mayor that will actually invest in communities as well, not just in police infrastructure, but what about supporting strong block clubs so that we can actually monitor our own neighborhoods and don't have to rely on the police over-policing us. It has to be a balanced discussion if we're going to do this the right way.
Mr. Vallis.
You can't have police accountability without the proper infrastructure. And when you have 1 sergeant for every 30 instead of 1 for every 10, And when you have training officers who aren't incentivized to be training officers, you do not have effective policing. You do not have effective police accountability. Second, you need beat integrity. You know, the whole approach has been violence reduction initiative. That means they move police all over the city. That means you got police not working in the neighborhoods that they're familiar with and people not familiar with the police in their neighborhoods. So you need beat integrity, because you can't have community policing without beat integrity. Third is you need training and redundant training, and anyone who's been in the service knows that. And fourth, we got an opportunity to ensure that the next generation of police officers come from our schools. We have 10,000 students in our LTC. I know because I opened most of those programs along with the military academy programs. So the next generation of police and fire and EMT and drone-operated piloted drone operators and EMS and nurses can come from the schools. And if you have police who are from the community and live in the community and are part of the community, that's
Mr. Vallis,
transformational.
thank you. Okay. At this stage, we'll allow each candidate to ask a question of another candidate pertaining to the issue of African American displacement from Chicago. Any candidate asking a question not relevant to that subject will be interrupted by me, the moderator, and forward their question. No pressure.
What do you say, no pressure?
Candidates will have 30 seconds to ask their question, and the question candidate will have 1 minute to respond. Starting off, Tony.
So my question is for Susanna Mendoza. My question is for Susanna Mendoza. During her tenure in the state legislature, she was known as a person really tough on crime. For most of her time there, she was a big proponent of the death penalty and even said at one point that she would be happy to flip the switch. So my question is, given the disproportionate impact that the criminal justice system has had on black and brown people, how can we be confident that you'll be supportive of criminal justice reform?
Well, thank you for that question. I'm happy to answer it. So, I know what it's like to be on the other side of crime. And my tenure as a legislator fighting to protect people in communities of color against violence against people in communities of color has been informed by my own life experience. Having said that, yes, I did support the death penalty, but I was the deciding vote on abolishing the death penalty in the state of Illinois. It would still be there had I not voted to abolish it. Having said that, people who look like me, black and brown faces across the city, feel victimized every day by people who commit crimes against them, and that's not okay. So I'm always going to stand up to protect families and children who are being victimized by gangs and gang violence. I know what that's like, and I don't think that families should have to leave their neighborhoods as a result of that. Punishment is a role, but investing in human capital, as I have said I'm committed to doing, is another very important part of that equation. Thank you for your question, President.
And since we have you, you get the next question.
Oh, I do? Awesome. All right, that's good. This is fun. Okay. This is for President Preckwinkle. All right, it's a shocker. Yes. So people have been driven out of this city. People have been driven out of this city and displaced in part because of high taxes, including regressive taxes like the soda tax, had it not been repealed, and a rigged property tax system that disproportionately hurts black and brown communities. It drives rent up and drives low-income families out of the city. You don't fix the most regressive tax system by passing 2 more regressive taxes. Why, after 8 years in office, here's a question, did you and your ally, Joe Barrios, do nothing to reform our broken property tax system? And what will you do differently as mayor that you didn't do in the 8 years as county board president?
All right.
Fair enough.
Come on, everyone. Thank you.
So I'm the county executive. There are 11 separately elected officials in the county, each of whom is responsible for their own bailiwick. So the county executive does not run the jail, for example. The county executive does not run the state's attorney's office, nor does the county executive run the assessor's office. So when I saw the Tribune article, I was deeply disturbed and very concerned. And I called Joe in and I said, look, we've got to find out whether this is true, and if so, how we can do something about it. So we brought in the Civic Consulting Alliance, which is a pro bono consultant that had worked with the President's office on many other subjects. They brought in an expert to look at our assessment instrument, determined that in fact the Tribune was right. Joe committed that he would work with the Civic Consulting Alliance and the expert to revise our assessment tool and to implement any changes that were required. I worked with Joe because he was the person who was responsible for implementing the changes that needed to be made. And I promised, after he was not renominated, to work with Fritz Kagi, and actually I've met with Fritz several times, and said that I would work with him and support him in his efforts to continue the reform of our assessment process.
Thank you. Dr. Anya.
So my question is actually for Comptroller Mendoza. So a lot of the reason why many of us are here today is because we recognize that there has been failed leadership at all levels in the city of Chicago. We know this not just from the 2014-2015 election cycle, but also in 2011. We have seen black wealth decline precipitously. We've also seen the loss of 250,000 black residents. We've seen people losing their homes. We've seen more than 50 schools closed with no plan to put those kids in better schools when they were closed. We've seen a failure of leadership. How will people be able to understand? How would people be able to, as mayor, you supported the previous mayor, the incumbent, and all of his policies. How can we trust that you would do anything different from how he's run the city?
That's a great question. And while I supported him in the past, that doesn't mean I supported all of his policies. And the truth of the matter is that he's no longer running for mayor. I am. And I am not the prior mayor. I'm Susana Mendoza. I have a long career of fighting for people and causes that are important to all of the folks in this room. And I have been, I would say, over the last few years, you've seen who I am. You know who I am. I've been taking on Bruce Rauner for the last 2 years when a lot of people were standing behind me, just cheering me on, but not engaging in that fight. So I'm going to continue to stand up and fight for what I know is right. And I'll tell you what, the future of Chicago, that's worth fighting for. And I'm going to put my heart and soul into making it right for the people of this city. Thank you for your question.
Mr. Vallis?
I decline to ask a question.
Okay. All right, moving on. Lori.
I don't have a question. I said from the beginning I was going to run about the issues.
Yes, Lori. You declined, sir. It's
I
Lori.
declined.
Thank you. Thank you.
No problem.
Well, as tempting as it is to ask questions of certain people on the podium, well, I will ask a question of Paul Vallis. Okay. I've heard you talk about your growing up years in Roseland and how challenging it is and what the differences are now. Can you speak to the displacement that's happened and the lack of investment in that community?
Yeah, well, as you know, with the decline, the closing of Sherwin-Williams, the steel mills, et cetera, the city for 4 decades had no economic development strategy to revitalize those areas. So they allowed that community to continue to disintegrate. I mean, we all remember the stop again, start again, stop again, start again, stop, stop, stop with the Pullman revitalization. The only concrete investment that's been made in the last 40 years has been the buying of the Mendel campus and the opening of Gwendolyn Brooks during my watch. But at the end of the day, with the absence of jobs came the absence of income. With the absence of income, Michigan Avenue, the other Michigan Avenue, 10 miles from the Gold Coast, has turned into an economic desert. There's more economic development activity in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, than there is on Michigan Avenue. So you need a comprehensive plan to revitalize these hard-pressed areas. But thank you so much for asking the question.
All righty. Now we will take questions from the audience, which have been selected by the floor team. Each of you have 1 minute to answer each question. Starting off with, Tony, at this question. In the light of today's tragedy at Mercy Hospital, will you commit to reopen mental health clinics? What else will you do as mayor to prevent this from happening again?
I think the first thing you need to understand is this mayor decided that he would close half the mental health clinics in the city of Chicago. We had 12 mental health clinics, we now have 5. And he did it as ostensibly because he was going to save money. But let me just tell you, it does not save money. When people don't get their meds and don't get their therapy, they end up in Cook County emergency room at Stroger Hospital because they're not well, or they end up in our criminal justice system because they're acting out. So the idea that you could close mental health clinics and save money is ridiculous. It's cost shifting, it's not saving money. So that's the first thing. Let me just say too that we have been very supportive of gun control measures. We have some terrible problems in this city with the ready availability of guns. We saw that in the terrible tragedy today at Mercy Hospital. We know that the people in the city of Chicago who are at risk for being shot are the same people who were at risk of being shooters. And we've got to try to address the challenges those young people face.
Controller Mendoza?
Could you repeat the question for me, please, Evan?
Closing mental health clinics.
Oh, was it, would I close mental health clinics? What was that? Would I bring them back, right? Yes.
In light of today's tragedy at Mercy Hospital, you commit to reopen health clinics?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the most pressing issues that we have is making sure that people have access to the quality health care that they need. And mental health needs to be destigmatized first and foremost and treated in the same way that we would treat if you have a heart problem. People are afraid, large part, to go seek medical services for their mental health because of the stigma that exists today. Now, I also believe that we can utilize our schools as community anchors that actually provide not just breakfast and lunch, but also supper for our kids, and at the same time partner with local community caregivers, social service providers, to be able to make sure that parents have a safe place where they can get access to services that they don't have today, including things like mental health. I absolutely will make a commitment to improving our mental health system in the city of Chicago as your next mayor, and thank you very much for that question.
All righty. Dr. Anya.
Yes, I would commit to that. I think access to mental health is foundational, not just in communities, but also in schools. I believe that our children actually need access to licensed social workers and counselors in their schools. That requires an investment on the part of Chicago Public Schools. I also believe that mental health is about addressing, in part, substance abuse and addiction, and supporting the organizations that do that work on the front lines in our neighborhoods. And finally, we have to make sure that people have access to the foundational components that contribute to lack of mental wellness. Stress is a trigger. So when people can't find jobs or cannot get access to homes, those are triggers that we have to address. So it has to be a comprehensive strategy that includes reopening the mental health clinics that were closed, but expanding that service, not just in communities, but also in schools.
All right, thank you. Mr. Vallis.
Yes, our communities need a restoration of their social service infrastructure. That means communities need to be provided with the resources to open mental health centers, opioid addiction and drug addiction centers, family planning centers. There are so many things that the community needs because, you know, there are people in the poor communities who are suffering not from post-traumatic stress, but continual traumatic stress because the traumatic stress never ends. And, you know, we've all heard about the talk to legalize cannabis. Well, you know, I think we need to make sure that the city gets its fair share of that income, and we use that income along with developer fee or a portion of the developer fee income so we can start investing in community-based social service infrastructure. And when we do that, not only will we help the communities, but we'll also stimulate economic activity in the communities because sometimes the first things to open along those closed along those closed street lines is social service offices. So I think we have an opportunity to do that.
Righty. Lori?
Yes, I've been working extensively with mental health services providers and professionals, particularly over the last couple of years through my work around police reform and accountability. We have to rebuild the neighborhood-based mental health services. We have to make sure that we also work to destigmatize mental illness so that people will seek treatment and seek help and families won't feel afraid when something is going wrong and reaching out for help. But we also need to make sure that we keep providing mental health services in our community schools. I had the opportunity recently to be in the Brighton Park neighborhood at the Borough School and saw what they are doing to treat trauma in those schools. So there's a lot more that we need to do, and clearly we need to make sure that we've got a mayor who is focused on providing the help that's needed in these neighborhoods. As I said before, trauma is a huge problem throughout our city. Our kids are suffering from it, our teens and our adults, and we've got to provide the services that we need so we can have healthy communities.
All righty, next question. There is disparity in access to health care between the north side and the south side and the west sides of the city. Here's the east side, guys. What will you do to fix that? And we're going to start with Comptroller Mendoza.
Again, this is an issue of investing in people. As the controller of the state of Illinois, I've been dealing with a $16.7 billion bill backlog, which thankfully now today is about $7 billion. So we've done good work, but it's not just numbers. When I tell you 7 billion or 16 billion, these aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. Those numbers represent people, and they tell the story of how people have been decimated across the state over the last 4 years of around our administration. Having said that, that decimation means disinvestment in human capital. We have closed down social services across the state, and in Chicago, it's been especially bad in communities of color. So as mayor, I will look to invest money where it's going to have the greatest return on investment, and that's in people. It's in our children, it's in our families, and it's the right thing to do, because I know that doing the morally correct thing to do is more often than not also the fiscally sound option. So I look forward to investing in people as your next mayor.
All righty, Dr. Enya.
Can you reread the question so I can?
Sure. There's disparity in access to health care between the north side and the south side and the west sides of the city. What will you do to fix that?
Thank you for that. So as a West Sider, the fact is that I will live 20 fewer years than my counterparts who live downtown. That is a product of how we have failed as a city to ensure that all residents have access to the kind of health lifestyle that they deserve. Access is about a few things. One is transportation, making sure that there's transportation equity so that people can actually get to their doctor's appointments wherever they are. On the southeast side of the city and the far southwest side, you cannot commute 2 hours on a bus if you need access to health care. And that is the reality for far too many. So transit equity is key. The other is just to lift up those who pushed for a trauma center on the south side, the many community groups that pushed and fought for years to have one open so that in states of emergency, they actually had somewhere to go and did not have to drive all the way to Northwestern University downtown, which is a matter of life and death. So making sure that we have access to trauma care in our communities is absolutely essential. And then making sure that we're protecting the rights of people in their jobs to have access to health care.
I got you, thank you. All right, Mr. Vallis.
Yeah, four things, and it really begins at a very early age. I think we need a universal prenatal to the classroom program. So we're reaching out to first-time mothers and pregnant teens to make sure that the babies are born healthy and to make sure that the babies are being afforded and the mothers are being afforded the parent coaching as well as access to healthcare services, because so much can be accomplished. And the Cradle program that was abolished for some reason in 2004 was extraordinarily successful at closing all gaps at all levels, including healthcare gaps. Secondly, we need school-based health clinics in all of our schools. Third, we need to find a way to revitalize the neighborhood hospitals. And fourth is, as the doctor indicated, we need to make sure that everybody has access, is in close proximity to trauma services. Thank you.
All righty, Lori.
Well, fundamentally, we need to make sure that people can actually afford good quality health care, which is not the case in many stretches of our city. I would follow the example of a group called West Side United, which was formed by Rush Hospital on the west side with Sinai and a number of businesses when they found that the life expectancy of people on the west side was significantly less than people who lived in the Loop. They went into those communities, engaged them, shared the data that they had, and then put together a comprehensive plan to significantly uplift the quality of life. We need to follow those examples all over the city. We also need to make sure that people can get paid jobs that pay a living wage. wage. Because if you don't have the money to get access to good quality health care, then you're lost and you're going to use the emergency room as your primary care provider. So we've got to have access to good quality jobs, a living wage, and then we need to make sure that we are using the resources that are available in the healthcare system through businesses and other enterprises to really provide good quality access to people all over the city.
Thank you. Tony.
Cook County has run a public health and hospital system for 180 years. We've always taken everybody who comes to the door, regardless of their race or their religion or their ethnicity or their immigration status or their ability to pay. We have 2 hospitals out of 72 in the county, and we provide 45% of the charity care. Our 2 hospitals provide 45% of the charity care in the county. When we created County Care, which is our Medicaid expansion program, we included behavioral health services as well as physical health services. So you can get treatment for addiction and substance abuse issues as well as behavioral health challenges. So Cook County has put an emphasis on providing as much access as possible to quality health care for as many people as we possibly can for 180 years. So the county has made a tremendous commitment to public health and to access to public health. And I would try to do the same thing as mayor of the city of Chicago. We can't close mental health clinics on the grounds that this is going to save money. We have to invest in public health.
Tony, thank you. All right, move this along. Now we have audience questions directed towards one candidate. Only that candidate will get the answer. I believe one question has been selected for each of you. You will have 90 seconds to answer. And starting off, it's going to be Lori Lightfoot. This question is from Amaria Enya. For Amaria Enya, I'm sorry. For Amaria, sorry about that. Well, threw a loop at you guys. All righty. What is your position on the slated closure of the National Teachers Academy?
So I've actually been involved with parents and the principal of NTA for over a year, since they first learned that their school was going to be closed. I was part of a group, an equity committee that was formed to put forth recommendations on alternatives to closing National Teachers Academy. We presented our findings to the board. Again, this was over a year ago. I have been very vocal about the closure of National Teachers Academy as an equity issue, as part and parcel of this administration's practice of the lack of transparency, making decisions behind closed doors, and the fact that even a level 1+ black school is slated to be closed, which is a problem overall in Chicago public schools and how we view the value of our children. So I've been standing with National Teachers Academy since long before election season. It's been more than a year. I served in leadership on the equity committee, presented to the Chicago Public Schools Board of Education an alternative plan that was not adopted, and now in their lawsuit still standing in solidarity with them.
Thank you. This question is for Mr. Vallis. While you're working in the Philadelphia public schools, you closed 40 schools. Are you going to do that to Chicago?
Well, first of all, I didn't close a single school in Philadelphia. So you need to get your facts right. The bottom line is when I came into Philadelphia, they were going to privatize the entire school district. And I met with Ted Kirsch, who was the head of the teachers union, at the request of Tom Reese, who was head of our teachers union. And I made conditional on me coming to Philadelphia that there be a limit in the number of schools that they would turn over to private contractors, or I would not come. So at the end of the day, I did not close a single school in Philadelphia. So it's important that people get those facts corrected. And when I left Philadelphia with 5 out of 6 balanced budgets and almost a tripling of the math scores and a doubling of the reading scores. And the Philadelphia Teachers Union president and the head of the state teachers union are strong supporters, and they're going to be doing videos for me.
All right, this question is for Lori. How do you plan to make transit more equitable in Chicago?
Well, I think we've got to do a number of things. I'm very concerned about the decline in CTA ridership. That's clearly being occasioned by the fact that we have a proliferation of ride shares. We also need to make sure that, frankly, we're doing something about the traffic congestion, which is now making Chicago at any hour of the day feel more like LA or Atlanta or Dallas. So we've got to make sure that we look, for example, at best practices. New York is something that we're looking at very seriously, what they've done there to make sure that they're having equity between the rideshare drivers and the taxi cab drivers. We've got to make sure that we keep arming ourselves with every tool that we can to argue for additional dollars from the federal government. That's why we have to have a Chicago plan, not just in Springfield, but also in Washington, D.C., because we get a significant amount of our transit dollars from there. I support the expansion of the Red Line past 95th Street. And I think we've also got to look at look at reopening some of the closed CTA stops, because those stops, when they close, they brought down the neighborhoods because we lacked economic development around the closure of those stops. So those are some of the things that we've got to think about in rebuilding our transit plan. But we also got to make sure that, frankly, the CDOT does its job in making sure that the construction that's getting done across the city is done in a way that's thoughtful and isn't disruptive to traffic plans over and over again in the city. And then finally, I don't know about you, but I don't know when that Dan Ryan construction is going to be done. We've got to make sure the state lives up to its obligation and gets that done.
Next question is for Tony. In the event that recreational marijuana is legalized, how would you ensure that Black and brown communities that were criminalized by the war on drugs receive their fair share of reinvestment?
One of the things I consistently talk about is racial disparities in our criminal justice system. I talk about the jail as being at the intersection of racism and poverty. You know, half of the population of our county is African American Latino. 86% of the people in our jail are Black and brown. So 50% of the population, but 86% of the people in the jail. I'll also say that Chicago's half the population of the county, but 80% of the people in our jail. And the hyper-policing of Black and brown communities drives our jail population. And illicit drug use is pretty much even across ethnic groups. It's just that Black and brown people get arrested for it. That's the truth. Black and brown people get arrested and white people don't. So I'm in favor of legalization of marijuana. I think it should be taxed. I think the taxes should go, frankly, to support our pension obligations. We have to be careful that the taxes aren't so high that that marijuana costs more legally than it does illegally. You want to wipe out the illegal trade. So that I think it's really important that we understand that the war on drugs is really a war on Black and brown neighborhoods, and we have to be sure that we address that challenge in our criminal justice system. As I said, I'm in favor of legalization of marijuana. I'm also in favor of decriminalizing small amounts of hard drugs that people use for their own purposes, and we continue, unfortunately, to arrest Black and brown people for these kinds of crimes. Thank you.
All right, next question is for Comptroller Mendoza. How does supporting vouchers make you qualified to be mayor?
Sorry, what was that?
How does supporting vouchers make you qualified to be mayor?
How does supporting vouchers make me? Yes. So I did support them in the past. I represented one of the most overcrowded schools. My district had more overcrowded schools than probably any district in the state of Illinois. They were literally popping at the seams, and so it was something that I supported then. I don't support it now, and I do think that, I mean, this was many years ago, but I do support it. I don't support it anymore, but I do feel that it's important to work very closely with parents to make sure that we have options for children to be able to go to good quality neighborhood schools where they're going to get a great education. And the way that happens is by investing in our neighborhood schools. Back then, the only choice that a parent in my district, which is when I supported vouchers, had was to send their child to a school that was so incredibly overcrowded that you had children essentially learning in closets. That's not okay. At the same time, we have other schools in other parts of the city that have not enough kids for the size of the school. Having said that, I support, as mayor, at least a 2-year moratorium on any further school closures. And I think we really need to reprioritize how we invest in our neighborhood schools. As a mother of a child who's just starting and a 13-year commitment that we're making to CPS, I am fully invested in working closely with the Chicago Teachers Union and working with parents across this city who want to make sure that every child in every single neighborhood has a choice of an awesome public school for their child to go to.
Alrighty, that concludes the question and answer part of this forum. We will end with closing statements in the same order as the opening statements.
First of all, I want to thank United Working Families for having this event tonight. I'm a history teacher by profession, and I always say democracy is at the same time the best and the most fragile form of government on earth because it depends on an active, engaged citizenry. So I'm very grateful to all of you for coming out tonight. I'm a teacher by profession. I spent 10 years in the classroom. I know the challenges that teachers face and that schools face from the inside. I was an alderman for 19 years, almost 20 years, 2 decades. I worked with community residents to improve our neighborhood public schools. I worked on community building, redensifying communities, bringing in affordable housing, mixed income housing, market rate housing, trying to build our business strips. So I know the challenges that you face as an alderman when you have a vision for your ward and how important it is to have mayoral support. And I'll be able to deliver that support for the mayor's office for aldermen that have that vision. Let me conclude by talking a little bit about the violence. This is a real challenge to the city of Chicago. And our public health system works hard every day to try to address that challenge. We work to heal physically the people who come in with gunshot wounds. But we also try to adjust the challenges that they face spiritually. So we have a program called Helping Hurt People that addresses the spiritual, the trauma that young people face when they're shot. And we have to do more of that behavioral health services if we're going to have a safe city. It can't simply be a policing strategy that addresses the violence. It has to be addressing the needs of those young people. Thank you.
Comptroller Mendoza.
All right. First of all, thank you for the sponsors who put this together. This is a great forum. It was super exciting for me that this was my first. Certainly, hopefully not the last. But I do want to say that I am really excited about the future of Chicago. Like I said in my opening statement, this isn't about the next 4 years for me. It's about the next generation. And we all have this amazing opportunity to shape the future of Chicago together. I'm committed to working with every family, with voices that agree with me and those that disagree. And most importantly, I'm always going to be who I've always been, straight up and honest with you about what I'm thinking, about what I believe. And I'm most importantly going to listen to what you believe and what inspires you and what worries you, because that's what a good leader needs to do. Coming into a forum, any one of us here, we were opening ourselves up to boos, to applause, to people that are excited and people who are scared. And anyone who would have a problem walking into a forum where people aren't always going to agree with you shouldn't be running for mayor. But all of us are here, and I'm excited to be here with some fierce women as well, running for mayor of Chicago for a better Chicago for all of us, not just some of us. This election will determine what will happen to the next generation of Chicago. I believe we need to move Chicago into the future, and every single one of us has this amazing opportunity to do it if you join me and my vision for a city that works for all. The great displacement needs to end. Chicagoans need to stay in Chicago and need to know that they'll have a mayor who knows them, loves them, and will fight for them every single waking minute of my day. Thank you.
Lori?
I said at the outset that the question that we have to ask ourselves in this election is, who can you trust? I got into this race back in May because I saw the disparities in our city becoming worse. Having grown up in a working class family, having struggled financially and otherwise, having been denied opportunities merely on the basis of my race, my gender, or my sexual orientation, I knew that we could do better in this city, and we needed a leader who represented and reflected the values of the city. I didn't wait and remain silent while Rahm Emanuel was still on the ballot. I jumped in and I fought him, and we drove him out. So you should think about, who can you trust? Can you trust somebody who waited until Rahm was gone, until Goliath was slayed? Or can you trust someone who's gotten in, called it as they see it, faced the hard truths, and is going to fight for you every single day? We have an opportunity in this election to really speak our values, the values that we want for our children, for ourselves, and for our future. We have to have a leader who understands it, who's going to put people first, who's going to reflect the lived experience of people all over the city in policies and in government, who's going to open government up. If you want the same old, you got an a la carte menu of that. But if you want somebody who's a truly independent leader, who is unbought and unbossed, in the words of Shirley Chisholm, I'm your candidate. I want your vote. Thank you.
Mr. Vallis.
Well, thank you. Well, I think it's most appropriate for me to close by talking to you about my record at CPS. You know, I took over a school system in 1995 that was academically and financially failing, that had lost 110,000 students in 15 years, and that was facing $1 billion structural deficit. And over 6 years, I had 6 years of union peace, 17% increase in teacher salaries, pensions funded at 104%, 78 new school buildings and 350 renovated buildings, $1 billion in cash reserves, 12 bond rating upgrades, and 70,000 more students than are in the schools today. And equity was the rule. The majority of the new schools were in black and brown communities. 58% of the school construction work was done by black and Latino workers. And 75% of my new administrators and principals and executives were black and Latino. That's the record. That is the record. And that's the type of financial management and equity that I will bring to the city of Chicago. Thank you very much.
Dr. Anya.
I want to thank all of you for being here this evening to hear from those who say they want to represent your interests. Elections are a funny thing. People tend to adopt issues around election time. All of a sudden, the ability to speak truth to power becomes fervent when there is an office at stake. Who can you trust? Trust the folks that are doing the work when the cameras are off. Trust those individuals who have nothing to gain but still stand up for communities. Trust individuals who don't talk about what they will do for you or fighting for you, but those willing to fight with you. We know the issues in the city of Chicago. Many of us are living them every day. We don't need to rehash the issues. What we need is a new vision and a different kind of leadership that believes that a paradigmatic shift in this city is necessary to move us into the future. That it's not just different leadership. It's not just younger leadership. It's better leadership. It's not just years of experience. It's the kind of experience that builds the kind of character for the leadership that the city needs, that is about empowering people. The span of my career speaks to that. My life speaks to that. There is nothing else for me to gain besides that, and I hope that you will join me in this fight. Thank you.
That concludes our forum for this evening. I'd like to thank the candidates for attending and engaging in live discussion as well.
But before y'all leave,
And that.
just 1 second. My name is Greg Kelly, and I happen to be president of SEIU Healthcare Illinois. And so I want to first thank all of you all for coming out tonight. Was this exciting or what? Was this exciting or what? And so before we get ready to leave, I have to give a shout out to all of the sponsors. Let's make some noise for Action Now, the Chicago Teachers Union, Cook County Colleges Teachers Union, Grassroots Collaborative, the National Association of Letter Carriers Union, SEIU Healthcare, UE, and United Working Families. Let's make some noise for all of our candidates, you all. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for coming.